So this year we're going to do the weed walk in Ontario, New York. And the first thing is this. We went to Mark Phelan one year and the guys told me that they knew that they were getting a poison ivy-like rash from this plant. Well, it turns out that the name of it is Japanese knotweed. And what I thought originally was two different plants is the same. This is what it looks like for most of the year. In a little bit later in the summer, there is going to be a beautiful, almost like a feather, white feather, huge white feather. And I thought originally it was two plants, but it turns out to be both the same. When I walked about 1.5 miles down a very rocky creek to look at the Japanese knotweed, which I didn't think caused a poison ivy-like rash, I found that they were really right, because at the base of every single one of these was poison ivy wrapped around the base. So yes, they didn't get a poison ivy-like rash, but it was actually from poison ivy. At the base of this plant right here, we have a wonderful example of something called daisy flea bane. Anything that says bane means kill. So this is actually one that was used in medieval times. It was used to kill fleas in rushes on the floor of houses. And also it could be strewn like with mattresses or in clothing or things like that to kill the fleas. Now, by the time we would get to Penzic, we would see another plant that looks very similar, but it's asters. I know this isn't asters for two reasons. One is that asters don't bloom at this time of the year, and the other one is because the foliage is a little bit lighter in color. One of the things we have here is a traditional Vescor plant. Its name is Herb Robert. Herb Robert is probably the cure for the common cold. It was used as medicine for flus and colds, and I love it because the reason it is the traditional Vescor weed is that it is Herb Robert, so it is the bob weed. One of the first things you have to think about if you're going to identify wild plants is that you have to notice things that are really, really boring. So what we have here is something that's really boring but really important. This plant was brought here on purpose. It is called English plantain, or if you come from the South, plantain. The leaves are an antibiotic. They were used by mashing them up, making them wet and warm, and putting them in a cut or a sore. And it is a mild antibiotic. We have better things now that we could use, but it actually does work. The leaves are also really good mashed up and broken up to use for bee stings. They will take the sting out of the bee sting. It's called white man's foot because the Native Americans in this area of the world used it as a tracking plant, which meant that they knew that wherever it was, the European settlers were also there. They brought it here as a medicinal plant, but also as an edible on purpose, but the Native Americans thought that it was in the soles of their shoes so that everywhere they walked, they would find this plant. It's also an important plant to know if you are thinking that you might be allergic to cottonwood fluff, because this plant, as you can see, is blooming right now, and it blooms at the same time. This is one of the most high allergy-causing plants that you can come up with, and this is probably what is causing your allergies, unless it's being caused by grass, which is also blooming at this time of the year. This is another form of plantain. This is the common plantain. Later it will have a spike that is green. You will see it in every garden in the Rochester area. It again was brought here by European settlers as an edible plant and also as an antibiotic, as a poultice. Early on, it is apparently edible. Again, edible does not mean tasty. It is possible to live on it. So that later will have that green spike, which inside of the green spike are little black seeds, which are psyllium, which is your friendly neighborhood laxative. This was Hildegard von Bingen's favorite plant. She said one should eat of it every day, which either means that the nuns liked a whole lot of greens, or it tells you way more about medieval nuns than you really want to know. Next to it, we have oxalis, or sour grass. It has a number of names. There's a little yellow flower. And this is a very nice addition to salads. It has a lemon flavor. Don't eat too much of it. It also is a laxative type plant. So you want to have it just as like a note rather than the whole salad. On this side of the sidewalk is a white sweet clover. You'll see this again in all of your lawns. It puts nitrogen back in the soil, which is a very nice thing for having fertile soil. But the flowers were used through a lot of history as a tea for women's complaint. Can you say PMS? It makes this very nice, tasty, sweet tea. There is some concern at this point about other chemicals in it that might be a little bit dangerous, but it's one that was very popular. This little jobby is really interesting. It is pineapple weed related to chamomile. It is a tea plant which will taste like pineapple. You should be using it with caution if you happen to be chamomile allergic, because it is a relative. If you squeeze the little top of it and smell it, you're going to get a really strong pineapple odor. The other problem with harvesting any of it is that this is where it grows, which is right along a street and in wasteland. So it's a lot of times is polluted, and you have to be careful about where you're gathering it. If you're identifying wild plants, one of the things you need to do is look at plants at different times of the year. If you have driven down roads in the Rochester area anywhere in the summer, you're going to see these very bright blue flowers. It looks like a daisy or something, and people think they're bachelor buttons, but what they really are is chicory. So this is chicory. Chicory has become very popular in upscale restaurants to use in different kind of salads. It grows everywhere. It's a weed. It's enthusiastic. It's around every place. So it is not something that actually would cost a lot of money, but if you're going to buy it in a restaurant, it's really pricey. Again, in the waste kind of areas, in weedy areas, you're going to find this plant which is green on one side, it's white on the other. It's really raggy looking, usually hangs over the road. And this is mugwort. Mugwort has so many medicinal uses that it is actually pages of medicine. This is one of the ones that we destroy pretty routinely, but is a very, very valuable medicinal plant. And I'll leave you to look up for what. This is milkweed, and you can see the milkweed has started to bloom. The entire plant is both poisonous and edible. In order to eat this, you need to cook it in 3 waters because it contains a natural latex, which is that white liquid that comes out when you break milkweed, which is poisonous in pretty much every plant it's in. So you boil it in the 3 waters. I have tasted the flowers when they are at this point. They tasted green. They were okay. They feel in your mouth like broccoli, but they don't have a lot of taste because obviously after you boil them in 3 waters, they're going to have nothing left really. But when people were desperate and they did not have any kind of farming. This is bulk. This is something to eat. This is so you don't starve. But in modern times, kind of too much work. You can eat the shoots as a wild asparagus. You can eat the little sort of bird-shaped pods of seeds. The seeds from the milkweed were used in flotation devices up through World War I. One of my friends, Helen, who is a lot older than I am, gathered milkweed seeds to give to the war effort in World War I. That has now been, of course, replaced by different kinds of plastics, but it had a lot of uses and it was a very important plant. Now it's very nice to have for butterflies because this is one of the things that feeds butterflies safely. So many people, like me at this point, are growing some milkweed in the garden. It's super simple to start. It's kind of a pain to pull it all out. This is Mayapple, and this is thanks to Nesha, who brought it from her garden so that I can plant some here. It is a wild plant that is called American ginseng sometimes. It should not be used the same way because it's dangerous to use it. There is, you can see, a little flower that would have been between these two branches. It almost always has this Y-shaped branch with one little flower in the middle. It will grow a fruit that is the shape and taste of a sweet lemon. Eating it raw will mean you will be throwing up your lunch because it is emetic, which means it makes you vomit. But it can be used in jelly and things like that if you can persuade the deer not to eat them all before it's time to harvest. You can see that it grows by a tuber with also some little hair roots here. Once this takes root in a garden, it becomes, if you see like a whole bunch of this in the woods, like a big piece of it, it can all be one plant, all connected by the tubers. This plant is coltsfoot. Coltsfoot is a plant that is used for colds and flus and asthma. It is an example of something called the Doctrine of Signatures. Doctrine of Signatures was the idea that gods or the god give you a sign of how things should be used. It means sort of like, use me for this. So somebody thought that this looked like a throat. And they said, if it looks like a throat, it's going to work on the throat. Now, what's really strange is that a lot of times these things actually worked. So this one was rolled up and smoked as an inhalant for asthma. It is cooked with sugar to make a cough syrup, and it cooked with more sugar to make cough drops. The back of it is very soft and velvety, and the front is really shiny and green. I love the name in Russian, and please, if you are Russian, I am so sorry, my Russian pronunciation sucks. This is mat and machika. The mat is the mother because she's soft and warm, and the machika is the stepmother because she's cold and green, which tells you a whole lot about Russian folktales. This plant is called curly dock or yellow dock. It is one of the first greens that comes up in the spring. So if I were going to be feeding my family or doing medicine for my family, I would want to notice it at this time of the year when it's too sour now to use, but the leaves can be poulticed to stop a poison ivy rash. In the spring, I could come back and get it for an early green. It's one of the things that people used to call a spring tonic, because over the winter, they had no fresh food, and so you had scurvy, which meant your teeth were falling out, your skin was dry, your hair was falling out. It was very unpleasant. And this is one of the first greens that can cure scurvy. They didn't know why, but they knew that it worked. This is a kind of leaves of three that you really don't want to leave be. They are similar to poison ivy, and that poison ivy has two leaves across and one on a little stalk. But these are serrated like a serrated knife. You are never going to find poison ivy that is serrated. You're also not going to find poison ivy that has tiny little thorns, and these will become really big thorns. You can see that the berries are developing. They look like raspberries, and pretty much everything in this area that looks like a raspberry is a raspberry. There are about 205 different kinds of raspberries. They are all edible to some amount. If they are not delicious to eat, they usually are really cool for cooking and making jelly. Making jam with them is not recommended because there are too many stones and they are as hard as little rocks. Here we have wild grape. Wild grape is really wonderful for the leaves. The leaves are very tasty. These are the leaves that are used in Arabic dolma. And we used to go pick them when we were kids and make the stuffed grape leaves because the ones in the can are not so great. These little ones like this that are very shiny would be very delicious in a salad. They would give it a lovely lemony taste, and they're very tender. If you want to stuff them, you want to find this size, almost the size of the palm of your hand, so it's big enough to put stuff in, but it's still thin and not tough to eat. You want to always make sure that you find a Y-shaped monkey tail. The Y-shaped tail tells you for sure this is grape and not something like Canada moonseed or some other vine that might be poisonous. We want to avoid leaves like this for stuffing because there's a bug involved with this, and it's also very tough at this point. Wild grape leaves work better than the cultivated ones because they are a thinner leaf. All of the wild grapes are edible. Again, edibility does not mean delicious. They can be used for jelly. You need to combine them probably with something else in order to get a jelly that is palatable and use the full sugar type of pectin. This plant is black swallowwort. It has some other names as well. It is a sort of a viney plant. It has these beautiful flowers that look, they would say sort of black or brownish purple flowers. So it looks like a really cool plant, but it actually is very poisonous to butterflies. Butterflies will think that this is milkweed and they will be drawn to this. And it does poison them. So it is best if you can pull it all out. I unfortunately have fields of it at my house, and it's kind of a losing battle, but I will be pulling these out as much as I can because I don't want to be killing the butterflies. So what used to be my garden has now become sort of a wild plant sanctuary. And it needs weeding like whoa, but before it was all covered with weeds, I was growing this. This is spearmint. This is one I brought from my hometown, which was the one that my Arabic family used to make tabbouleh. And it would be also a very good one for sakanjaban because it is the most typical one. Mints have a four-sided stem. They have a strong mint odor if you break the leaves. They are something that you have to be very careful with little babies because people tended to use mint as a thing to calm a stomach. The problem is that mint, it calms the stomach first and then causes internal bleeding, which for a baby can be fatal. So mint for adults is fine. Probably you don't want to have mint and mint and mint and mint and mint if you have something like GERD because it's going to first calm it and then fire it back up. So nice one to use. This plant here is cleavers. It cleaves to you. It sticks to you. It's got tiny little they're actually sort of thorns, but they don't hurt. And it has these little balls. This is the one, if you get those little balls all over your socks, that's what this is. People actually harvested these tiny little seeds, roasted them, and used them as a coffee substitute. So you can imagine the amount of work that that would have been. Up along the side of the garage, we have another plant. And usually this is the one I say, okay, is this poison ivy? And people say, no, because it's got 5 leaves, which is right. Poison ivy will never have 5 leaves. It is also not grapevine. This is woodbine or Virginia creeper, and I have a soft spot in my heart for this because I lived on the corner of Brooks and Woodbine for a lot of years, and so this is the name of my street. The berries are similar to wild grape, except they are single. Wild grapes look like grapes. They come in a bunch like wild grapes. These have single blue berries, if you ever see them, which you rarely do. They are poisonous. People are concerned that the vine might cause dermatitis for some people, but I kind of wonder if the reason that that happens is that it very often grows companion with poison ivy. So let's take a look at poison ivy, because if you went into this garden, you would find some. This is poison ivy. Poison ivy has 3 leaves. 2, they are not exactly across from each other, but close. And 1 on a stalk with a point on the tip. Everything else varies. They can be dark, they can be light, they can be shiny, they can be dull, they can be little, they can be a single plant, they can be a vine. The vines can grow together and almost make a tree. If you can see it, look very carefully at the bag on the corner. You're going to see a brown stain. There it is. You're going to see a brown stain on it. And what that is the oil that is inside the plant. People think it's shiny because it's got an oil. The oil is inside. When you break the plant, the oil comes out at first white, and then in the sunlight, it turns brown. That oil is urushiol. Urushiol causes the poison ivy reaction, which is not an allergy. It is a chemical burn caused by the urushiol. People can become sensitive to poison ivy at any point in their life. Lots of people have said, oh, I'm not allergic to poison ivy. And my answer is just wait. This one is just kind of fun. It's a flower that you see usually in woodlands and where it's a little bit wet. And you see it all along the sides of the road. It's really pretty. People usually call it wild phlox. Its actual name is Dame's Rocket. Phlox usually has 5 petals and blooms in the fall. And I remember it by a mnemonic with the name of the flower, because phlox is Phlox. 5 letters, 5 petals. This is Dame's Rocket. Dame, D-A-M-E, 4 letters, Dame's Rocket. And it blooms at a different time. So one of the biggest things that you also have to think about when identifying wild plants is looking at the structure of the flower very carefully. Just because they look similar doesn't mean they are the same. And also to think about the time of bloom, because that can help you to make a correct identification. In this area, we have quite a number of things happening, and so it's a little bit harder to see things. But this one here is Nightshade. Nightshade is related to tomatoes, potatoes, and all of those kinds of plants. It has a similarity to poison ivy in that it has 1 leaf on a longer stalk with the point and the 2 leaves across. This one happens to have 5 leaflets. Normally they look more like 3, like this. They are not poisonous to touch. The plant is poisonous to eat, so I don't really suggest that you eat it. but it will have the red berries on it. This is not deadly nightshade. This is solanum. It is a sleep aid, but as you know, if you take too many sleeping pills, you're going to end up dead. It's dangerous for little kids. It grows very often in bushes all over Rochester, and it is one that I would really suggest if you have children or your bushes are on the side of the road and this is growing there, pull it out. It pulls very easily. You don't have to use an herbicide, and it would be a lot safer. You're not going to eradicate it. There's tons of it. Another thing that you're going to see in this pile of herbs is you're going to see this plant. Here, I'm going to pick this one because there's a lot of this. This has lots of names. Ground ivy, gill over the ground, creeping Charlie, and ale hoof. Ale hoof is the one we want to think about because this is a tea plant. You could use it to make a tea if you like the smell. Has a four-sided stem like many other mints. It is related to mints. It doesn't smell like a mint. It has a very strong, very distinct odor. Some people like it, some people don't. However, early on when European settlers came to this area of the world, there were no hops. So it is called ale hoof because it looks like the hoof of a horse, and it was used to brew ale in place of hops, which they did not have. Although I don't drink and can't drink, I really, really, really want somebody to try this at some point and make some beer with it because I'm just so curious about what it would taste like. Another plant that's in the middle of all of this stuff is a pea plant. You're going to see it in a very short while blooming on the side of every hill you go by on the expressways. It has beautiful pink and white flowers, and everybody says, oh, look at the sweet peas. These are not sweet peas. It will have pea pods that look like Chinese pea pods. It is poisonous. How can you tell? The difference is that this plant has a flat stem. There's a stem going up, and then there's these sort of flat side leaves here. And it also has these little jobbies. They look almost like little wings on the side. They are not going to grow into bigger leaves. That's what they look like. These are the leaves, and then you have these little leaflet things. This is everlasting pea. The person who named it needs to be shot. But the reason that they call it everlasting pea is that you can't get rid of it. You can pull and pull and pull and pull, and it doesn't come out. But you want to be very careful with this around little children, because now that snacks in daycare centers and stuff are very healthy, kids are used to eating raw pea pods, and if they see it, they're going to think that it is the sweet peas, the edible pea pods. And that could be a really dangerous thing. When I was teaching nursery school more than 40 years ago, we had cookies and crackers and cheese and other things like that. And so it wasn't a big deal. But now that people are using a lot of fruits and vegetables with kids, you have to be more careful with wild things that are poisonous because they resemble things that the kids are going to think are snacks. One of the kinds of things that is really interesting about wild plants is pine trees. And I've known for a long time that the inside bark of a pine tree can be ground up and dried and used as a flour. It was truly a survival food. It is not delicious at all. It tastes like pine. However, if it was the difference between starving and living, people used a lot of things that were not delicious. However, earlier in the spring, when the tips of these pine trees grow out and you see the little very yellow-green tips, those can be used as a tea, and I understand it's quite delicious. So I'm looking forward to next year being able to use them. In the middle of the yard, there is a giant maple tree, and these are the little maple seeds. What I did not know is that the little nuts inside the seeds that are inside of this can be roasted and eaten like little nuts. So I guess what I want to say is that we should continue to learn and continue to find out new things. One of the most important things to think about when you're learning botany is to never be satisfied that you know everything.